Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the 10th Krea Engage webinar. I'm so happy presenting this 10th webinar to you. I think when we started out, as a part of the Office of Outreach to do these sessions, we never thought that this would be so successful and we'd have people coming over and over to all of our webinars. So Shivani, thank you so much for being with us. And getting to put together such a wonderful topic for everyone. Thank you for being a part of this.
Thanks, Vikram.
Yeah. So just to introduce myself, I'm Vikram. I'm part of the Office of Outreach at Krea University. And our role is really to bring you everything that's happening at Krea. You must have met us at many of the school presentations or doing outreach events. But this is really, I think this session is really special for us because, I think we have so much request, from students who wanted to study biology, physics, chemistry. I think they're starting to now do, webinars on pure sciences, and this is the first one. So just to introduce Professor Shivani Jadeja. So Dr. Shivani holds a PhD in biological sciences with a specialization in ecology, evolution and behavior from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, USA, and an MSc in wildlife biology and conservation from the Wildlife Conservation Society India program that at the National Center for Biological Sciences India. Her teaching and research draws from her international exposure to the state-of-art teaching and research facilities in India, USA, and Costa Rica. She emphasizes teaching life sciences to the undergraduate students and mentoring them to carry out inquiry-driven projects, both in the field and in the laboratory. Student-centered teaching style emphasizes development of higher order thinking skills, including critical thinking, problem solving, and synthesis. Her broad research interests are primarily in the field of evolutionary ecology that span understanding causes and consequences of variation in life history strategies and plant and animal interactions. She uses a range of empirical and theoretical approaches to address her questions. Her research findings are published in peer-reviewed international journals and presented at international conferences. So thank you so much again, Professor Shivani, for being with us. And before we begin today's session, I'd like you to, really introduce yourself, in your own words. Tell us about your journey. What really inspired you, from, studying sciences and then not going into a traditional field like medicine and getting into research? I mean, could you share that with our audience?
Sure. First, thanks, Vikram, for the introduction. And I'd like to thank you for getting me on this platform, giving me this opportunity. I'm really excited. I'm so happy to see so many students attending here, and especially knowing that they have at least some interest in biological sciences. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and take a second to share my screen. Vikram, if you could let me know if you can see it, that would be great.
Yes, I can see it. You can.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, Vikram. So my journey is, it's not that hard in the sense that I came from a family where there was an interest in nature and wildlife, and so that got me interested in animals. But the interesting thing is, when I was finishing my 12th, I was thinking about the best way forward, just like a lot of you over here today. And at that time, biotechnology was the thing, and I kept thinking about places where I could go for a good biotechnology program. Then two things happened. One, I realized it had a lot of chemistry. And the other thing that happened is, in conversations with the family member, I said, I'm interested in wildlife, but I want to do biotechnology because that's where the field is going. And that's when I was stopped and I was told, go for what you're interested in. Because if you're interested in something, it doesn't matter what the current or the future scenario of that field is. As long as you're the best over there, you will always do well. And so that's what made me stick to what I was really interested in. I ended up doing a bachelor's in a major in zoology with minors in botany and chemistry. And then luckily I got into a very good master's program in this. When I say luckily, I say that because they take 15 students in alternate years. And so at some point it does come to chance, even if you're very good. And that really shaped my training. And these photographs here are from my master's research, where one of the, as I said, I was interested in plants and animals. One of the things that interested me was how they interacted with each other. And this is a work from Vedavadar National Park in Gujarat, where I looked at blackbuck and how their social behavior and movement influenced moving of a woody tree into grassland habitats. And it's really, they've got really beautiful behaviors. And this is their dung. They eat the fruits, and they bring the seeds in their dung to sites in these open areas. Here's a seedling of this woody plant. It's an invasive woody plant. Woody trees don't belong in grasslands. And so I was looking at the dynamics of how the behavior was influencing and affecting and helping a tree to come into a grassland habitat, which is going to be detrimental to the animal that's bringing it there. After finishing my master's, I wanted to continue research, and I got more interested in interactions, species interactions. This was seed dispersal related. I went on to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and ended up, after multiple rounds of thinking about what to study next, with a unique system, the Yucca Mott system. It's a Yucca plant, which is it's been studied for co-evolutionary processes for years, and I was lucky to have it very close to the place where I studied as my PhD. And I wanted to see how this moth interacted with the plant that it was pollinating. The cool thing about this moth, and whenever I have an opportunity, I love to try and show this video, is that the moth actively pollinates the plant, unlike bees that just go around and happen to transfer pollen to help the plant form fruits. In this case, the female moth will collect pollen, and she will first lay an egg in the flower and then go and actively pollinate. And the idea is that that pollination will allow fruits to form, and the seeds will be the food for the eggs that she's laid. And here's a very short video to show what that does. And here's a moth you'll see. And this was taken using a night vision camera out in the field at night, the nocturnal. She has a ball under her head of pollen. And first she goes and lays an egg. And about a minute or so, and then not always, but she will go up and she'll actually pollinate. Very beautiful behavior. And I wanted to study a lot of interactions between these two, the plant and the pollinator. And here is an image of an undergraduate student who came to the field once with me for one season, and she was helping me measure the growth of the fruits to help me understand, model the fruit growth patterns. And I did a lot of other studies and experiments to try and understand how the moths are likely to change their egg-laying behavior, under what conditions, and how the plants are likely to change their fruiting and flowering patterns. Now I'm at Krea, and I'm really interested in continuing research in this area, and trying to scale up by looking at more interactions, and also trying to look in the Indian context, how we can improve our understanding of plant-animal interactions. And of course, in addition to that, I'm really looking forward to teaching the biology major. We're going to start our biology major for the first time coming August. And we've developed a very, very exciting curriculum that I'm so looking forward to actually implementing. So
Yes,
that is a bit about me, Vikram.
very interesting. Thank you, Shivani. So, now bringing the audience to the actual topic, I think when me and Shivani were having this conversation saying, what should the topic be about? And we were having this general conversation saying, should we start with just talk about biological sciences or life sciences, or let's just talk about careers. And I think I remember Shivani telling me that, this is what I'm really interested in, and, this is where the field is going. And maybe we should talk about how data and numbers are now being involved and being used more and more in the field. So thank you, Shivani, for actually bringing that topic. So do I really need to be good at numbers to do well in biological sciences? I mean, if I had a penny for every time somebody asked me this question, and we are going to address that right today here with Shivani. So the broad discipline of biological sciences is increasingly using quantitative tools, including mathematics and data analytics to advance the discipline. So we will really explore today why that is the case and what that means for students, those of you who are not, poor with the numbers but still passionate about biology which is the study of life. So the flow of the event today would be that so Professor Shivani would go through a small presentation to put her case across about why she thinks that, and what can the students do. And then we'll sort of have questions taken from you. So feel free to type in your questions while she's presenting the case. So off you go, Professor Shivani.
Thank you, Vikram. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. And if you could let me know if that works, that would be great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Vikram. So as Vikram said, we discussed and we sort of narrowed down to this topic. And this is very personal to me too, because just as I said, when I was thinking about biotechnology, I realized it had lots of chemistry. When I was thinking about getting into ecology and biological sciences, I did not think I was going to deal with numbers because I was not good at numbers. But it will surprise you to know that now in my research, I use a lot of data analytics. I actually even use mathematical models. And I've realized that they are important. And if I really want to do well in biological sciences, that I need to use numbers. And for someone who's thinking about taking biological sciences and is concerned, I felt that this today's short presentation from my perspective might help you think through what your choices may be and what you may want to do. So I've got some questions to sort of guide today's case that I'd like to present. First is, do numbers matter in biological sciences? And that's a question that a lot of us may wonder. And I'd like to flip it and sort of get you to think about this by starting with this recently shared and created cartoon by a cartoonist, Frank Mariani. And it talks about once upon a time in algebra class, and shows an instructor showing a particular mathematical function and how to understand the graph and changes in their function. And if you can start identifying what that function looks like to some extent, or you might, I wouldn't be surprised today, and we'll come to that in a bit. But if you look at the bottom, you see the one student commenting, like we'll ever use this stuff. So before we go forward, I'd like to ask you, have you ever felt this way about a concept or a topic being taught in a mathematics or statistics class? And I'm going to allow you to interact, and there you should see a question there, and I'll give you about, let's say, 20 seconds. Go ahead and please answer. So I've had about half of you answered. I will give you some more time for the rest of you.
I would say yes. I can't poll, but I'd say yes.
Sorry, Vikram. I kept the panelists out to avoid bias.
Yes.
Okay, I think we've got almost everyone. Yes, I think that's 100%. Great. I am going to end this poll, and I'm going to share these results with you. And I don't think you will be surprised by these. It is so great to see some of you saying no. You found that everything that you learned being engaging, and that is so great. But majority of you said yes, and I can completely relate to that, and so can Vikram. So let's move ahead, and now give me a second. I want to come to this other figure, okay? And when we look at figures, there is math underlying it. Now, in this case, it is a figure of it's a schematic diagram, so it's not built with actual numbers. But if you look at the x-axis, it talks about number of days since first case. Y-axis talks about number of daily cases, and this is with respect to the current pandemic that we are all in the midst of. And before I go into more details, I want to ask you another question. Give me a second. And Vikram, I will allow you to vote this time.
Okay.
So there you go. There's another question for you. And this is the last question for today in this form. So Okay. I'm getting some of you deciding what you want to do. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds and then I'm going to close this. Okay. Almost everyone. Okay. So here are the results, and given how numbers work, you know, if we have, because we have so many, if this is the pattern we found, I think if the remaining ones also responded, the pattern would remain similar. And this is some reasoning and concepts related to statistics. Okay, and so we have a good idea of where we stand. A lot of you have seen this, and I think if I would have asked you this question, and I'm going to stop sharing this now. If I would have asked you this question before the COVID-19 outbreak, I doubt anyone of you would have seen this this image, or maybe very few of you would have seen this image. And this has been out there trying to explain how, if we did not have any kinds of social distancing norms, how the spread of the disease would take place. If you start from the x-axis, from the number of days since the first case, the daily number of cases would likely peak in this fashion and then drop. But if we took social distancing measures, then you would not see such a big peak. And even though the infection or the outbreak would last for longer, if you look on the x-axis, it lasts for longer, you would not see a peak, and so you would be within your healthcare system's capacity to be able to handle all those who fall sick. If you have a certain number of beds, your total active cases at any point should not go over the place or country or state's healthcare capacity. Now, if you remember, and I'm going to go back a little, this cartoonist is trying to sort of talk about the same thing as to how these functions are being taught in mathematics classes. However, when we sit through them, we often feel that there's no use of them. But it's only when we see a situation like this, we realize, this is where it's used. And it's not that the use of such functions has been realized when we saw the COVID-19 pandemic. These functions and this concept of using these functions to understand spread of diseases and how certain interventions can change the distribution of spread has been there in the field of epidemiology for years. Let's take an example from a paper from 2007. This is way before we encountered the novel coronavirus pandemic, and it talks about it's a study on the last comparable pandemic that the world has seen in the 1900s, the Spanish flu. And of course, this study looked at multiple comparisons, but here this was one of the most striking and interesting ones. This is of two cities in the US, Philadelphia and St. Louis. And this thick line shows the pattern of spread of death rate per 100,000 population. And the dashed line shows the same for St. Louis. If you look at this, what this does is it takes the numbers, the real numbers that are there, and it puts it in a visual form for us to be able to make comparisons and understand what's going on. And that's where the maths and the stats comes into play. One of the interesting things that the numbers help them understand, the researchers understand, is that in Philadelphia, for example, their early first cases started around this time over here, and they took about 14 days or so more than St. Louis to start implementing social distancing norms. They in fact didn't take it seriously, and they even allowed a big parade to happen over there, which then led to this sort of overwhelming increase in deaths per 100,000 population. On the other hand, St. Louis, their first case was around close to 5th of October, when they already started noticing deaths in Philadelphia. And so they took notice of that. They learned from that, and within 2 days they implemented social distancing norms. And there they not only reduced they flattened the curve, as this is what we refer to as flattening the curve, but even what they found was that the total cumulative deaths also reduced. And it gives an indication, a quantitative indication of how a 14-day difference in taking a decision for social distancing was linked to much higher deaths in one case compared to another, and how rapid introduction of social distancing can have a very large quantitative difference in death rates in case of pandemics like these or outbreaks like these. And perhaps if a particular concept was taught to you from the perspective of an application, it would have probably been more interesting. And sometimes we are limited in the ways we've learned things, where often we fail to see its applications, and that's where we may feel that something is less useful and less important. And I'd like to just take some time to sort of show you how numbers are so very important. Another thing that sort of not just the numbers themselves, but the reasoning and thinking processes to how you want to compare quantitative things is to think about what you are really comparing. So this over here, we could have just looked at death rate, okay? But two cities could have different populations, and the death rate could mean different things. And so you have to look at it, you have to standardize it in some sense. So it is that ability to have quantitative reasoning that allows you to make appropriate comparisons. So when you go and look at different current trajectories for the pandemic, if you're looking at different countries, you need to think about what's on the axis. And the ability to do that is something that comes from mathematical and numerical reasoning. And for someone who's really averse to mathematics and data analytics, your next question could be, why can't I see patterns in data and skip mathematics and data analytics altogether? And here I'd like to sort of give an example of one of my studies. I talked to you about my work on the Yucca moth and the plant that it pollinates, the Yucca plant. And one of the things I wanted to know was if it opened more flowers in a day, on the first day it flowered, then would that attract more moths? Okay, and each dot over here is an inflorescence, and I'd go to that inflorescence when it opened flowers. I'd count the number of flowers and I count the number of moths. And the darker the points, it suggests that there are more points, overlapping points over there. Now, if you forget the line that's over there, it's very hard to see an actual pattern, because there are overlapping points and the data is noisy. That's standard for ecological data. Ecological data is often very noisy. And so statistics allows me to come up with nonlinear trends to explain this pattern and show you that yes, there is a positive trend. So with increasing number of flowers, more moths tended to come to the plants. Now, another thing is, it's possible that this trend just happens by chance. It's not impossible. How do I know that it's unlikely by chance? Again, statistical tools can help me understand that. Let me give you a simple example. What if I give you a coin and I say, toss it 10 times? Now, if it's a fair coin, your expectation is that 5 times you get a head and 5 times you get a tail, right? But it's possible that once you'll get 6 heads and 4 tails. It's also possible that once you'll get 7 heads and 3 tails. But what if you do that 50 times and every time you get less than 3 heads, or say less than 3 tails? That makes you think that this is not a fair coin, right? The same logic goes into the formal statistical tools that we use, and that helps me know that this pattern that I'm seeing is not by chance, is very unlikely by chance. There's some uncertainty around that, and we live with uncertainty. And even though we don't talk about it all the time, it's understood, and it's important to be comfortable with that. So it's very unlikely that this pattern that we see is by chance. And so without the use of these tools, it would not be possible for me to make important findings with respect to the systems that I am interested in. And so even though when I started out studying biology and ecology, I thought I will not look at numbers and I just go out in the field, take observations, I realized to make meaningful contributions, I need this quantitative framework. The next question that could come to someone's mind, if they still aren't interested in mathematics and data analytics, is what if I choose to work in an area that doesn't use mathematics and data analytics? Then you ask, well, are there subdisciplines of biology that have that? Well, yes, there is a variation in subdisciplines of biology in terms of how heavily they rely on mathematics and statistics. One of the areas is a primatology field of studying primates, their behavior, their culture, their social behaviors. And I'd like to use, rather than just give you a broad perspective of how mathematics is used across the different subdisciplines, I'd like to give you my perspective by following a narrow discipline and just giving you a perspective of mathematics and statistics influences it. All know about this very famous field biologist, Jane Goodall. You've probably heard her voice in as narrations in documentaries, heard about her work, her fight for all living organisms and the environment. She started off her career with her PhD in field research in the 1960s, which now is more than 60 years work on eastern chimpanzees in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. And if we look at one of her early papers, this is in 1964, and this paper changed the field of studying primates and culture in non-humans. She found that tools were being used and stones were being used in a very proper aimed fashion in a community of wild chimpanzees. And this paper was published in Nature, and it was cited more than 500 times. In a small field like primatology, something that's cited and referred to 500 times is a very, very big deal. And I'm not expecting you to read through this. I'm just going to highlight two parts. One is to just get a sense of how numbers have been used. So she talks about over 6 months, she observed 25 chimpanzees, and she talks about her results from 3 chimpanzees using sticks for a completely new purpose, and some of them using leaves for wiping, and stones for aggressive, sticks for aggressive throwing, sorry. And here are her results. This is one of the results, is that she talks about the data over there, right? It's most of the sticks used in this way were estimated between 1 feet 6 inches, 2 feet 6 inches, although I measured one which was 3 feet 6 inches, right? So it's very, very descriptive. A lot of it is behaviors being described with very little numbers. Let's move ahead to 1997, where she and her team has a publication in Science, another very, very well-known journal for the sciences. And here she and her team looks at dominance rank. So in chimpanzees, they have ranks, hierarchies in their social structure, and they look at how dominant you are may be related to your reproductive success. This is specifically for female chimpanzees. And unlike the other paper, which was completely almost entirely descriptive, this one had figures, and this is one of the figures. And on the x-axis you see the average rank of the female going from high, medium to low, and on the y-axis the surviving number of offspring per year. And this is each individual, and they show through using the statistics. Again, think about this figure without the line. You're not really sure what pattern is there, but they use statistical tools to determine a linear relationship. And they also use statistical tools to determine that this pattern you see is unlikely by random chance. Okay, and basically they found some very interesting findings that if you were lower in rank, then you had fewer surviving offspring. Okay, and this is the power of being able to use numbers. And if you're really passionate about biological sciences, then this is something that you may have to do. And often, I love field work, and often those who are not fond of field work, and if they want to be an ecologist, people tell them, if you're really passionate about your questions, you'll be happy going around in the field and doing field work and slogging out in the hot or humid or rainy environments. It's just like that. But sometimes you have to embrace something because you're passionate about one of the fields. Let's fast forward further and now look at one other study by Jane Goodall and many other collaborators here from 2012-2013. Here they're looking at fitness benefits. It's to do with your survival and the number of offspring and number of children you have. And it's looking at a behavior for where males make a coalition with one male can make a coalition with another male to be aggressive towards others. And in this paper, they have really integrated their behavioral work in primatology by using genetic data and behavioral data for a long period, and use network theory to quantify coalition and interactions and hierarchy, and also molecular tools, which is very, very data intensive, to figure out who had how many offsprings. With chimpanzees, when you're out in the field, you can't tell who is whose son or daughter. You have to go and do genetic tests to do that. And it just gives an indication of how far the field of primatology and animal behavior, which had been largely descriptive, has come, and why you really need these tools to be able to say something interesting and important. Without being able to have those tools, we wouldn't know so much about that part of biology or biological systems out there. So here, the larger the circles, and the blue ones are the lower ranked males, and they find that the larger the circle, they were able to sire offspring shown by this star, just like those who are alpha males shown by this maroon. And also the ones which had larger circles were able to get into a higher rank in future years. And it's the mathematics and the statistical advancement and the will to integrate, either through collaboration or through learning on your own, that allowed Jane Goodall and her team to be able to learn so much about this system. And knowing more about chimpanzees, which are the closest living relatives to us, can help us know more about us too, right? So there's lots of implications of these kinds of research. So while I did say that not all subdisciplines of biological sciences heavily rely on mathematics and statistics, that is changing. And as time changes, there is more and more expectation for each individual to be widely experienced and exposed, not just say, okay, I'll collaborate with someone in the math discipline or in the statistics discipline, I'll stick to my own biology discipline. But to be able to collaborate, you need certain fundamental understanding of those disciplines. Otherwise, how do you collaborate with someone else, even if you don't work on it on your own? And so I'd like to refer you to this interesting essay that came out in 2004. This is open access. So if you go and look up this title, you should be able to get the full article. And the title itself is very interesting, and it gives it summarizes what I've been trying to hopefully convey successfully, that mathematics is biology's next microscope, only better. Biology is mathematics' next physics, only better. And if you think about it, think about the field of biology, it advanced by leaps and folds when the microscope was discovered. The optics, physics allowed that to happen, and then the cell was discovered, and then so on and so forth, and the rest was history. Now, that's what mathematics is doing. It's allowed technology and tools to be able to make advances that we couldn't make earlier. Computational technology with respect to computers have also allowed that to happen. The second part is about how traditionally physicists used to look to biology to see how they can apply their findings and advance their theory to improve to understand biological processes, so they can improve and advance physics. The same thing is happening now in mathematics, where mathematicians are looking towards biological processes to see how they can advance mathematical theory and applied mathematics. So it's turning into this beautiful integrative field. And if you do happen to go and look into this essay, you'll notice there is one figure over there, which, or rather a table that very nicely shows how the different subdisciplines of biology have integrated mathematics and at what stage that happened. And of course, you'd notice over there that genetics and the field of bioinformatics has been one of the earliest ones that brought in mathematics, and is now, even today, one of the most computationally advanced fields. But as I showed you, even fields that are traditionally descriptive, like primate behavior, have become also very, very advanced through current technology and ability to collaborate and integrate with other disciplines. Okay, now some of you may still want to find a way to escape. What if I consider a job that won't use mathematics or data analytics? And that's where I'll tell you, maybe we want to go back to this cartoon. Are you really missing the ways in which mathematics and data analytics are necessary for whatever you do? And let me give you an example. What if you say you want to become a journalist and you want to work on writing about science journalism, still focusing on biology? Well, you are then going to be speaking to researchers and people creating new research, and you need to be able to make your independent assessment of that work. And without being able to understand a graph, understand their findings, you will not be able to do a fair job of that. What if you say you want to get out and you want to work in a laboratory that does diagnostic testing, like the tests you do for the COVID-19 positive or negative infections, right? Well, you feel I'm going to do the wet lab work in the lab, and I'm going to just pass my output to the next bioinformatics person, and I don't have to deal with the numbers. You may not have to directly deal with the numbers, but if you know how your output gets analyzed and used, it will help you make your work efficient. For example, you will know that if something changes by a little, when is it a risk? When it doesn't matter. What if temperatures change? What if your quantity changes? If you know those processes and you can understand the mathematical and data analytical reasoning underlying it, you can ensure that you avoid issues resulting in poor either sampling or processing of your samples, right? So, of course, now this then comes back to the first question. Then does that mean I need to be good at numbers to be to do well in biological sciences? Well, I wasn't good at numbers, and as you can see, I am now. As I've told you, I use data analytics a lot. I've used mathematical modeling, and I talk about numbers a lot. But when I say numbers here, I don't mean arithmetics. And often, a lot of people, when they say numbers, they mean arithmetics. They mean whether you're able to think about multiplication, addition, division in your mind, whether you're able to do it quickly. That doesn't matter. We don't want you to be calculators. You don't need to be calculators. What you want is, especially at Krea, what you want is to be interested in mathematics, data analytics, and the reasoning underlying it. And that, along with, of course, an interest in biological sciences, would be something that we expect. And one of the things that is unique, at least to Krea, is that we do have required courses at the beginning to help students interested in this to get that basic fundamental training, to be able to get to this level where you can become good at not the arithmetic numbers, but the reasoning part of numbers, so that you can do well in biological sciences. That is all I have for today.
Thank you so much, Shivani. That was so interesting. You made your point very clear. By not saying it in so many words, you've really shown us that there is really a lot of data that is being used to, today, not just in biology. I think data really is one of the guiding principles at Krea for our curriculum, and regardless of what you study, I think data is important. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So now we really move into some questions. So Shivani, what we've done is we've picked about 5 or 6 very popular questions that we keep getting in outreach from school principals, from teachers, from counselors, from parents. So we'd like to pose some of those direct $1,000,000 questions to you, and let's see how you answer them. So let's start with the first one. So I think a lot of students, especially studying in CBSE, have this question. They have to study, chemistry and physics, but they get an option of studying either mathematics or biology. So can somebody drop mathematics and still pursue the field of biology? What is your opinion on that, and how should students navigate this?
So, Vikram, it's interesting because when I studied, I think just the year after I finished, they started having these choices for dropping mathematics and biology, and I used to feel envious because at that point I was like this, probably a lot of students right now over here. I didn't want to deal with mathematics, but I think if you are interested in biology, unless your university has a restriction, it should not stop you. And especially at Krea, just it's liberal arts and science, and so you can take biology even if you had no biology in your 11th and 12th, and so it should not stop you. Of course, depending on how much training you have had and what the expectations are for when you come in, sometimes you may need to put in some more hard work. There is no excuse to hard work, but it shouldn't stop anybody, and at least at Krea, it's not something that is limiting.
Okay, thank you. Now the question that we get, I think, with this whole public health situation, I think things have changed so much. Just in 3 months, I mean, we can't even think of going out, and, behaviorally so much has changed. So in the field, like, how do you think, the COVID-19 situation has changed the field of sciences, especially the study of life sciences? Do you see any new trends emerging in the sciences education or research? Like, do you think study of epidemiology will increase suddenly in the post-COVID world?
In terms of research, I can talk about 2 things, I think. So I'll talk about the epidemiology part second. First is by becoming more isolated in this sense, where, as you said, we can't go out, I think the science community and even the science education community has become more open. We now see about more webinars. We now see about more avenues where you can just sign in from your home and listen to things. Lots of museums have made their tours free. Lots of courses are now available either at a cheaper rate or for free. And so there had always been this push for open access, for open science, where even when you do research, you share your data. However, it takes time for people to be to accept that, to share everything that they've done, or to be open about talks that they have at their institutions and open it out to everybody. But this, I think, has allowed for that to happen, and I think we all would see that with a lot of organizations that we're interested in. They have now more and more webinars where anybody from anywhere can sign in. The second part, with respect to research and focusing on epidemiology, because we are currently in this crisis, is one of the things that limits a lot of research is funding. And while researchers have the mind, the passion to do work, it cannot happen without funds. Especially fields like epidemiology, large experiments are needed to understand things. We need larger. If you want to do molecular tools, you need equipment that whose costs go in crores. And so without proper funding, that cannot happen. And often funding such large as that comes from government organizations, and their funding divisions change based on what their priorities are. And countries that have traditionally been hotbeds for epidemiological or public health or medicine findings have often also reduced in the last recent years funding towards primary education, primary research and research in these areas. So in that sense, I have a feeling that this pandemic is going to again increase funding in these areas, which is really necessary. You can't just decide to start doing research when a pandemic hits you. And unfortunately, that's what sort of happens, because if you look at other coronaviruses, the current one is one type of coronavirus. You look at MERS, look at Ebola. When these outbreaks took place, funding got put in to try and come up with a vaccine, but then they died. Those outbreaks died out, and the research funding dries out, and people lose interest. The scientists don't lose interest. It's the funding that comes that allows the science to happen that goes. And so again, the hope is that this will hopefully let people realize that you can't stop funding and go for research the day you need a vaccine. You need to have continual research. You need to have basic research to inform applied research.
Thank you. The next question we have is, when we talk of undergraduate education, students are so confused, because one is, of course, they have so many sources of information. I mean, this webinar is one of the sources of information, but they have the internet, they have their school teachers, they have counselors. So when they talk of studying at the undergraduate program, right? I mean, many of us believe that this is really a foundation program and really, shouldn't be so professional in nature. So questions like, should I take say microbiology? I mean, I'm really interested. I get students who say I'm interested in, biotechnology, or I'm interested in bioinformatics or prosthetics or things like that. So should students take those as a full major, or do you think somebody taking, say, a biological sciences as a major at the undergrad level and then really taking a pinpointed master's program, what do you think of this?
So, of course, this is going to be a personal view. I personally feel that it's better to be broad at this stage, because I guess when I was at this stage, that's what I was advised to do. I was so passionate about working with animals, and when I decided that, okay, no biotechnology, let's stick to animals, and I wanted to see if I could find a wildlife biology course at a bachelor's level, I was advised not to do that and stay broad. And I was so happy that I ended up with zoology, botany, chemistry, and gave me the breadth in biological sciences to be able to know where I wanted to be. Of course, my interests remain the same, but that may not happen. Also, the field changes a lot. And so the broader the understanding you have, the better you're equipped at adjusting to changes in the field. And you may not remember every bit, but the fact that you know that these things exist are sufficient for you to be able to go back and teach yourself something when the opportunity arises. So it's a personal view. The broader you are at this stage, the better, because I guess, once you get out of your 12th and you're getting into undergraduate, you are saying you're passionate about a field, but when you start studying it in depth, you may realize what it really entails, and you may realize that something else is, you're more passionate about something else.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of questions are coming on the chat, so I'd request students to just put their questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to take all those questions, and just put your question once. Let us finish these 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll come into the chat box. Yeah, thank you. So the next question is really about, what are some of the minor options that students should consider, if somebody is interested in a biology major. I mean, I saw one of the questions where students said, can I take environmental science as a minor, or should I take computer science and make it like biotechnology? I mean, what are some of the popular ones, and what are some of the futuristic options that students can look at as a minor?
This again goes back to interest. What are you most passionate about? When you ask for popular, what seems to be popular is those inclined more towards the molecular or chemical side of biological sciences tend to club biological sciences with chemistry. Those more inclined towards instrument related or applied physics, and how that can influence the biological processes, tend to take physics along with it. And those inclined more towards the ecological or the environmental and sustainability side of things tend to club it with environmental studies or environmental science. However, as I mentioned earlier, and what I had been advised, if you're passionate about something, you're good at it, you'll be able to do well independent of what you pick. And there's so many opportunities in unique and in unique combinations. For example, combining biology and history with a focus on how the field has changed historically, and focusing on biology, thinking about it from a literature perspective, focusing on biology. Yeah. So if you may want to be in the creative side, and you may want to club it with other arts fields.
Thank you. So now coming home, right? What is your thought process? You've been involved in designing the sciences curriculum at Krea. I think Siva, who heads the division, what really is special at Krea? How are sciences looked at differently? And maybe you can talk, especially from the point of view of biological sciences. We have this interwoven learning model where we weave the arts and the sciences. So how have we really done that, and what's really different? Why should somebody choose to study with us and over other universities?
Okay. Yes, and actually, I'm so glad. Just recently, we made a lot of progress in designing the biology curriculum, and got to much more refined stages. And it's been a lot months of discussion among 4 faculty who've come from very, very different backgrounds associated with biological sciences. So we bring our own perspective, and the idea was to ensure 2 things: to ensure that all the students do go through some fundamental, all the essential fundamental concepts and information. And so that has shaped the required courses and what will be covered in the required courses. The other idea is that when we cover the material, we don't follow it based on topic A, topic B, topic C in siloed or linear fashion, but we think about it from the point of view of framing questions. How does life begin? What are the processes involved in that? And there you don't only just say, okay, I'm going to look at one molecule, I'm going to look at molecules first, and then I go to cells, and then I go to the next thing. When you get to cells, you also talk about molecules. Then when you get to a particular system, you start talking about what happens at the molecular level and how that affects the larger system. And that approach is what hopefully will help students make connections that are often missed out when you teach something in silos. It seems like what you learned in your as a biomolecule has nothing to do with when you learn digestive system, but those molecules are there and they affect things. The pH of the stomach affects how different receptors are behaving and things like that. So that is a major approach. Another thing is, I'm not, to be honest, I don't know how many other places have this, is to allow for specialization. And that we do this in 2 ways. One is after the required courses, there are options for a few number of elective courses. And this is where, depending on student interest and faculty availability and our own faculty's integrative approach to their own research. There are courses there's history of biology that could be taught, there's use of mathematics in biology, use data science, how do you read and critique scientific work, what are the methods, thinking of biology and physics. So these integrative fields are options that one could use for further specialization. Another way for specializing is through capstone thesis. And this is as those who've gone through the website or have spoken to you would know that that's true for any other major at Krea. But that's another space for specialization where you do evidence-based research, and you're working closely with the faculty who mentors you through that process, and that becomes your piece of work.
Thank you. And finally, the last question from these set of questions is, what are some of the careers you have after studying say a pure major or pure science major like biological sciences? I mean, do these jobs pay well, and what are these jobs? And I think these were some of the questions that we received even in the chat. So could you tell us a little bit more? Because when you do medicine, you clearly know what is your career, right? What about pure science?
I'm smiling because this is a very tough question for multiple reasons. One, yes, it's not a linear field, right? You can do so many things, and the other thing is the field changes a lot. I remember when I started out, biotechnology was a big thing. It's not that it's not a big thing anymore, but there are other areas that have sort of also come up. So one of the areas is molecular biology. For example, if you think about it, the tests that are done for detecting COVID infections, they are gene-based, okay? They use PCR, so they use molecular biology techniques. It doesn't seem like humans are going to be free from infections anytime soon, right? May not be this, but these things go on, and so advancements in this area may mean lots of opportunities for research, for getting into the industry in different forms. Also, it would mean more production on the industry side for producing vaccines. So these are all the areas where biologists could contribute. You need not always be in the actual active area of where you apply direct biological concepts to work you do, but you need that sometimes for certain work types. You need that knowledge to do other things like develop policies, develop protocols, develop quality control documentation type of work. So that way there are lots of opportunities. Of course, another opportunity is based in research. You can move into research area. This can be more basic research, or it can be applied research. Basic research would involve the type of thing that I talked about from an ecological perspective, or it could even be cancer research, for example. It could be research on neurodegenerative diseases, or it could be applied research. How does a particular medicine work? Is it effective? What is the best way to administer it? If you have a test, you validate the test to determine how reliable a particular test is. This is something that has to be done even with the COVID tests that are out there. And we've heard in the news recently, not just very recently, but when some tests came, that there were issues with those things. And so there are lots of places where biologists can play a role. Personally, I feel that in the current time, often a master's degree is required for one to be able to do well in the field. So once you do a biological sciences bachelor's, it would help tremendously if you have a master's or degree, further education to get that extra level of specialization and depth, I guess.
Thank you. So now we take questions from students. So this Anushri Bhattacharya. This is a very interesting one, Shivani, for you. So she says, I'm a student of grade 11th and I love math and science. Can you give us more ideas and examples of how we can do well in these subjects?
Oh dear, hard work. So I sometimes, I'm not sure specifically, Anushri, whether your question is with respect to doing well in exams versus doing well in the subject in terms of knowing the subject well. I have personally always focused on knowing the subject well, to sometimes to the detriment of the marks I got when I was in school. But I used to, whatever fields that interested me, I used to go and take short courses. I remember when I was doing my bachelor's, I went and did a ornithology course because I was interested in this area. And it's important to go and read widely to do well. Uh, but if you're asking how to do well on your exam, a lot of this unfortunately does depend on how your school conducts exams. Do they focus on reasoning? Do they focus on you being able to memorize things? This is the latter part, really I struggled with whenever I had to. And so I'm not sure if I can directly answer your question, but if you mean by subject, uh, go look up what other people do, go read things, and then you've got so many opportunities to find stuff online now, which is great. Go sit in webinars at institutes where people work on things that you find interesting.
Thank you. So there's another question saying, do you think India has scope for careers related to biology other than medicine? And if yes, what these are? I think you've answered the latter part, but I think the question really is about India versus the rest of the world. I mean, you've studied in the United States. So how are things different back home?
So India definitely has a lot of scope for biology, and it it is increasing. For example, there are recent reports that India is producing large amounts of the drugs and vaccines needed or being tested for COVID-19. So we have production facilities for a lot of these where biologists are going to be important. From a research perspective, I know you said that I studied, did my PhD in the US. I'd like to add, I did my master's at a very, very good place in India. And usually it's considered good to do your PhD at a different place. And if you're at a very good place, then you have to then step out to do your PhD. And so it's nothing less about the opportunities here that led me to go out. It was wanting to look for a difference from where I was, going to somebody else, which is standard practice. And the research that is conducted in India across fields is on par with international work, and as evidence, a lot of research work does get published in international peer-reviewed journals, just like work from elsewhere, and it's comparable.
Oh, that's very, very encouraging to hear, Shivani. Thank you so much. The next question is really, so there's a question from Swarna Lakshmi Ravi. She says, ma'am, please enlighten us on genetic related field.
Okay. Yes, genetics. That is not my area of specialization, but it's an upcoming field. So the advancement of tools, especially it started off with the PCR and to do with finding a particular protein, if I'm not mistaken, and I hope I'm not wrong over here, which can remain active at higher temperatures, which is difficult. So if you cook certain things with protein, they'll change their structure with higher temperatures, but there are certain proteins that can remain active at higher temperatures. And the PCR uses a protein that was found from an organism that could survive in high temperatures. And that resulted in the advancement of the tools and techniques for molecular biology that made the technology cheaper and also more easy to have in a smaller space. And so molecular tools are being used widely. They're being used for doing diagnostic tests. Again, like I kept referring to the COVID-19 tests, but similar diagnostic tests for determining presence of genetic disorders, the likelihood of having certain disorders in offspring, your children, right? The presence of certain genes for Alzheimer's or certain athletic genes, and also there's a lot of focus on gene technology for this is completely advanced, where you actually focus your treatment based on the genetic structure of the patient. And it gets to a complete advanced stage where you figure out what is the genetic structure and then what kind of medicine would work. And so there is a lot of scope and current technology, including now starting of a CRISPR technology has made it really a field that has lots of potential. It even makes its way into understanding primate behavior, for example, right?
Great. Thank you. So the next question is really from a student, from somebody called Soham Bakshi, sorry. So he says, if statistical tools are establishing linear relations with non-linear ecological data, won't that mean that the variation is also going to be a point which can't be overlooked, and also that there is really no way to pinpoint any trends in such variance? If that is the case, then what are the possible measures to get around it?
That is a very specific question. So here's what happens when ecologists or biologists are trying to understand their data that they cannot visually do. They use statistical tools. The simplest statistical tools is a linear relationship. It has its flaws, but if you don't have other tools, if you don't have the strength to have other tools, earlier you didn't even have the technology to have more formal tools, you stick with linear relationships. However, now that we know that we can use other relationships, and it's better to use nonlinear relationships when they do exist, because then you're explaining your data better. It is important to use those nonlinear relationships so that we can then, as you said, we can cover the variance that's around it, the spread that's around it, and explain it better. I hope I understood your question properly, but yes, the noise, the uncertainty, the variance is important, and it becomes very important in ecological data. There was a last part to the question about.
Just a second. Yeah. So he says, if that is the case, then what are the possible measures to get around it?
So, okay. I think that was a long question, and there were some parts that I would, if I was talking to you in person, I'd probably clarify before answering. But I guess the idea is to try and use statistics as a way to formally talk about your work, and it may not always be perfect as long as you explain what you've done. So if you explain you've used a linear relationship because that's the best you could do, and you're clear about it, then the opposite person can, on his or her own, make assessments about the reliability of the work. Okay, and that's how science works. The idea is not to get perfection, it's to improve and progress. And with more technological tools, we have even more sophisticated quantitative tools available to explain data. But one of the things with trying to get too nonlinear is also that you can fit a horse to your data. You can make one line go through all the points, and then that's not meaningful. So you need to find a balance. It's not black and white.
Thank you. The next question is from Deepra Mazumdar. She says, can concepts of permutations and combinations and probability be applied in biological sciences?
Yes, definitely. So when we look at distributions, for example, I'll just give you a simple example. A distribution shows like across for different possible values, what frequency you have. Like it can be a height distribution, for example, or it can even be the distribution of infections, right? Daily distribution of infections, and you can have when did you have 10 infections? How many times did you have 5 infections a day? Things like that. It can allow you to determine what's the probability of having a certain amount of infections in a particular case. And all these distributions get used, normal distribution, Poisson distribution. These are different shapes that allow you to see how a biological process works. It is based on the probability. And to determine what's the average, what's the variance spread, you use these concepts of probability, permutations, combinations.
Thank you. The next question is from Meghna Rao. She asks, what tools of data analysis do you generally use in biology? I mean, I think she's asking about softwares and tools.
Okay, I can quickly answer for both, I guess, a little bit. It varies a lot. It varies a lot from field to field, and I wouldn't be able to speak about other fields, but I personally, in terms of software, I prefer FOSS, free and open source software, the ones that you don't have to pay for. There are 2 reasons for that. One is it makes it easy to it makes it easy to use, and it makes it easy to teach. Easy to use in the sense, if I have a computer, I have to work on another computer. I don't have to worry about the license being on one computer. The other thing is, if I'm trying to teach someone else, an assistant, I don't have to worry about licenses. The specific software that I use is R statistical software. It's like R for rabbit. It's just a letter R. It's also used widely, and it's for a lot of applications ranging from ecological, social, behavioral, molecular. But like, for example, a lot of people who do mathematical modeling, I use R for that too. A lot of people use a paid software called Mathematica. There are different software for doing phylogenetic analyses. So it varies. In terms of statistical tools, again, based on the question, that varies. It can be very simple from a straight line linear model to very complicated smooth lines, or called additive models, or it can be even more complicated networks, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. The next question is from Aditi Balaji. She says the paper that were shown were really interesting. My interests lie in wildlife conservation and also in interaction between animals, plants, and humans. Ma'am, could you please share platforms where I could find and read such research papers?
Research papers from a reading perspective, there are two things you could do. One is very basic thing is you go to Google Scholar. So if you use Google search, you search for Google Scholar, and you put keywords for the area that interests you. And for papers that there is open access to, the HTML or PDF becomes available on the right hand side, and you can click that link. There will be some papers that you don't have access to. So one thing you could do is you could sign up for a Mendeley account, Mendeley, and there you should be able to access some papers that other people have uploaded. Another place is a ResearchGate. ResearchGate account you could create, where again researchers, when they put in their articles work, you can access it. And another way of getting articles is when you go to a scientific article, one of the authors will have a small envelope sign on there, and that's the corresponding author. And I think almost always the corresponding author's email will be available. You write to that person and say, can you please share your article with me? And whenever I've done that, usually very quickly they share their PDF with you. Unless, or another thing is you associate yourself with an institution that has a library. But there are so many ways you can get access to papers. You may have to look around and find the best way for the papers you are interested in. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you. So I'm going to skip some of the questions because either they've been already answered, or maybe your school counselor can answer these questions better, and they aren't related to the topic here. But the next question is really from Jean Sahaya Mary. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She says, "Hello, ma'am. Good evening. Can you suggest ways and means of proceeding with projects, especially data collection, like in the International Baccalaureate curriculum during this COVID unusual time?"
So I'm guessing you mean, I'm guessing it's about doing small projects at school level, my guess is.
Yes, and collecting
And
data.
collecting data, and this is a challenge, and this is something I was talking about earlier today. I've got 3 students from Krea currently. They're working with me on a research internship over the summer, and today was our first meeting, and this is something that we talked about, that these are unusual times, and you won't be going out in the field and collecting data, but we'll get data from elsewhere. You just have to be very, very creative, and you can get data from literature. So you can have students go and look at other work and get data from that. They can get data from certain websites. I can think better from an ecological perspective. If you want to study certain species, there's so much information out there. You can ask a question and then get that information in terms of body size, or in terms of the numbers or population size and things like that. Another thing is, at least for a lot of science fields, data sets are available to ask that you could ask questions for. The important thing is you give credit to that data properly, and that's totally fine. And there are 2 data sets that I am aware of, and there'll be so many more. Dryad, DRYAD, Dryad repository, and Figshare, FIGSHARE. These are where a lot of journals actually mandatorily ask authors for accepted papers to put their data. So in the two of my papers from the Yucca Mott work have all their data on, I think one is on Dryad and one is on Figshare. So you go there and you search the area that's interesting to you, and you'll find data sets in Excel or CSV format that you could use, and you're limited by what questions you can ask. But in some sense, I think you're you are no longer limited, because now you can ask questions about any species out there, for example. What might help is going and looking for resources and ideas for how others are doing these projects, and that might help.
Thank you. There's Gautam Satish. He asks, unlike physics, where everything, where most we observe in natural world can be abstracted down to equations, and there's a larger sense of universality, generality. Would you say that biology is data-driven as it is, because that is not the case? Do you think biology will get more and more data-driven with time, or become more theoretical as we understand social interactions and the brain better, etc.?
So I will argue biology has different parts. There are parts of it that are already very, very data driven, very, very evidence driven, and it's going to get even more evidence driven. But there are other parts of it that are more nature information driven, in terms of getting more descriptive information, which are also important. You cannot ignore those parts. So while you can make things abstract and put it in equations, and you've learned certain things, but you still have to go out there in the field to get more newer information. You may then find ways to make that formalize that into equations, but your observations also have a key role to play. They help you identify often what could be leading to the findings that you see through the equations. But yeah, compared to a field like physics, definitely a field like physics is way more formally quantitative. There are some subfields of subdisciplines of biology that are heading that way, but a lot will still have a lot of descriptive information that still plays a very, very big role.
Thank you. The question from Madhavan Subramaniam. He says, why biostatistics is not emphasized in UG level in India?
I don't know if I can answer
So,
that.
yeah.
And I'll tell you honestly, I don't have a great idea about how much focus on biostatistics is. And part of it, if you're thinking about the biology curriculum, part of it could be just traditional lack of use of formal biology. So one thing is that, research field advances at a certain rate. Okay, it finds facts, and that information goes into your textbooks. There is a gap sometimes between when that happens. So if a field if the research field has advanced and started becoming more quantitative, it will still take time for those tools to get into your textbooks, for there to be more focus on quantitative tools. So if you do a molecular biology course, a genetics course, there'll probably be more quantitative statistics in there, because it's been traditionally more quantitative focus. But an animal behavior course may have less than what is currently there in the research field. But otherwise, I don't think I can give a specific answer as to why other places don't focus on that as much.
Thank you. I think we have the last 2 minutes and maybe 1 or 2 questions more, but we
Sure.
have a lot and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So the next question is really, if I want to pursue a field that requires other subjects, for example, if I require chemistry and computers along with biology, should I prioritize math over one of these? I mean, I think she's trying to ask, if I can only do 3, including biology, should I prioritize math over chemistry and computers?
Wow, that is a tough question. I think this goes down to what your interests are. And as I said, if you are going to remain in biology, you will be using math. It may happen either through a separate math curriculum, or a math curriculum that is integrated in your biology curriculum. And so maybe what might help in making your decision is go look at the details of the curriculum and see which mix of topics within the curriculum seem to fit well with your goals.
Thank you. I think we'll take the last question. This is from Kalyani Sharma. She says, hello, I will be majoring in biological sciences at Krea. Okay, starting this year. I didn't have math in 11th and 12th. So what other things I should be thorough with before I start at the university?
First, congratulations. Uh, Very happy to hear that. And second, I think that is a question for a faculty who is associated with the math curriculum. But as one of the things that I mentioned earlier about the curriculum, overall curriculum at Krea, is that in the first year, each student has to take a set of required courses that help you gain foundations in the range of topics that we believe that every individual must have, and that includes mathematical reasoning and data analytics. And it is there is no expectation that you come fully trained with those, and we start at a level that someone who may not have taken those topics in 11th or 12th, maybe even earlier, will be able to understand and follow, so that everybody comes to a good level of understanding of those topics.
Thank you so much, Shivani. I think it's been really wonderful, this conversation, and I'm really hopeful that a lot of students got questions to so many of their answers to so many of their questions post the webinar. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Vikram. And you know what? I feel if they got more questions from this, that's a good thing too.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for joining us. I think you've always been a wonderful audience. And I think we get so many, it's every time that we get this overwhelming set of questions, and we try to answer as many of them. But continue to join us again for the future webinars. There's something also other than this that we do, which is called Krea Vibes. This is, I mean, positive vibes. And this is an Instagram live session that our current students do with, young achievers. So go right ahead into the Krea Instagram handle and log in. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you so
Shivani, once
much.
again. Thank you.